You've tuned into Tomcat Tales, the story of Ashland's legends from the gridiron, the court, the diamond, and beyond. It's a deep dive into Ashland Tomcat sports history. Now, here's your host, Mark Maynard.
Government, and he's worked with presidents, and he has just done a whole lot in his life. He really has. He's been the president of the U.S. Soccer Association and was instrumental in bringing the World Cup here. But before all that, John Koskinen was a football player for the Ashland Tomcats in the late 1950s. He was a center and a captain as a senior in 1956, along with Robert Wright. He was the 1957 class president, edging out Howard Humphreys, who says he's never really gotten over that. And John has not ever forgotten his old high school. He almost never misses a 1957 class reunion, and he was a cornerstone donor for the new Putnam Stadium. So simply put, John Koskinen is a pretty big deal and a pretty big Tomcat. Welcome, John. It's an honor to have you on here.
Mark, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate your giving me the opportunity to share some experiences with you.
Yeah, I know. I got to turn the clock back a little bit into the 1950s, and the podcast has been centered around Herb Conley. Actually, the first 10, and of course Herb was a sophomore your senior year, and I know you know what a tough guy he was even then. I'm sure. But he speaks highly of you, as people around here in Ashland do, and it's a pleasure to have you on here. You were in the. Tell me a little bit about how you came to Ashland. I know you weren't born here and all that, so tell me a little bit about that background.
Well, I was born in Cleveland and lived there until I was 12 in the 7th grade, and at the second semester of my 7th grade, my father got a job with Ashland Oil, and so we moved from Cleveland to Ashland. And so I went to Putnam Junior High School that second semester, must have been in 1951. And okay. So then went to Putnam for 3 years and then to Ashland for 3 years. So have always viewed myself as being from Ashland, Kentucky, and always proud of it.
Yeah, I know. I was going to mention that. I think Ashland's as much your hometown as any place. And I guess, you know, those years you're talking about, you're 12, 13 years old when you come to Ashland, and certainly those are formative years that none of us ever forget, you know, that time. What was it like in Ashland then? I know it was a pretty big city at that time.
Right. It has, you know, as everybody on the podcast knows, Kentucky's always been a state of smaller cities. So Ashland had about 32,000 people and was the 5th largest city in the state, you know, after Louisville, Lexington, Paducah, and I guess Frankfort would have been the others. So while it was small compared to Cleveland, which at that time had about 850,000 people, my mother wasn't quite sure where we were moving. But at 32,000, it was certainly the biggest city by far in northeastern Kentucky. Very prosperous. There were 4 chemical plants on the river. Ashland Oil had 2 refineries. Armco had a big rolling mill, an outdoor rolling mill. Right.
Yeah, it was quite a place in the 50s, and probably the boom time, if that's a word you can use with that. But I mean, we had more people here, more people working, and like you say, one of the biggest cities in Kentucky at that time. Tomcat football was big. Has always been big. That at least from what I can tell from history and going back, and you know, really big in the 30s, of course, when they had some of their greatest teams, I think. But there was a tradition and a mystique that kind of carried over, I think, from that era that carried into the 40s and even into the 50s, I think. Can you remember growing up, did you go to Tomcat games, like, you know, when you were at Putnam and during that time?
And I've always been, and my dad was also a sports junkie, so I never missed a Tomcats game from that time. Obviously in the spring of my 7th grade year, but from the 8th grade on, I went to every game.
Wow. So who were some of the people you looked up to as far as Tomcat players?
Well, you know, they had some great players. Don Clare was a wonderful player there in the 52-53 time. Larry Hiley was this player who bridged over into my sophomore year. He was a senior that year. Roger Brown's been a close friend of mine and a teammate of mine from Putnam days on. His brother Dick Brown, who went on to play at Eastern Kentucky, was a star then, and so we, had a number of guys to look up to. Buffalo Bill Hopkins was a great back for Ashland in those days. So, and I remember Ivan Canute. I don't know if anybody else does. But I was great runner, and always fun to watch. And I would urge people on the podcast listening, and if they have not bought Ashland Tomcats Football, A Total History, running from 1900 to 2018, compiled by one guy, what's his name, Mark Maynard. It's a spectacular collection of the history of Ashland football, and you can see rosters and scores and pictures, and I've been delighted to be an owner ever since it was published. But it gives you some reminders. So for people who think, gee, how does he remember all of that? Some of it I remember thanks to Mark.
Well, that's great. Thanks for that plug. I appreciate that. It's an interesting work for sure. One thing I've been kind of working on in the last little bit is a Kiwanis Bowl history, because they're not going to be able to have the Kiwanis Bowl this year for the first time in 68 years because of COVID. And what we're doing, we're going to simulate a game. And we're doing it from the time that the Kiwanis Bowl was between Coles and Putnam. Coles and Putnam played before it was the Kiwanis Bowl, which 1952 was the first one, and it goes till 1978. So right. Do you remember the Kiwanis Bowl? Do you remember playing in it?
It was a big event in those days, especially if you were, in junior high school and playing. I remember I'd come from Ashland, had no organized football in Cleveland for kids in grade school or even until you got to junior high school. So I went out for football because, as I say, I was a kind of football junkie, and played or practiced with a team as an 8th grader, but there were a limited number of uniforms, and so I did not dress for the 8th grade game when Buddy Sexton and a lot of guys I played with subsequently were on the Putnam team. But then, I played. I was a starter in the 54 game, which is, I seem to recall, although I think we lost that one 7-6 to Coles, and they never let us forget it.
I was a Bronco, so just to let you know. But anyway,
you otherwise seem like such a nice guy.
It's interesting though, that like I said, and what I did, I made rosters up from those 26 years, and if you made honorable mention All-State or any other All-State, you were on the roster, and it's about 100 players that came from that, and then I'm going to simulate a game, so I hope I won't let my Coles bias show during that, but we'll have to see about that. But anyway, Kiwanis Bowl was a great tradition, like you said. Really, it was a big deal back then. It was a real big deal, and it was, even after '78. In case you didn't know, I know the schools consolidated, so obviously you didn't have the two junior highs, feeding in like you did for years and years and years. And Ashland and Russell started playing a Kiwanis Bowl, and they've actually played more of those than they played from the original Kiwanis Bowl. But
right.
Anyway, a great tradition in Ashland. Some of the guys have told me, and I don't know if your group was part of this, they would play the B team against a combination Coles Putnam team at the end of the season.
It was varied. When I was at Putnam, let's say in the 54, or I guess it would have been the 53 season. I graduated in 54. Right. In the 53 season, shortly, obviously, after the Kiwanis Bowl started, the tradition then was during the year, there weren't, because Ashland was larger, so you ended up as a junior high school, you played high school B teams. You played Ironton B team, which was quite a challenge. And you played the Tomcat B team. And, your goal was to survive. And I remember thinking, wow, this is great when I get to high school and I'm playing, football probably on the sophomore team, the B team. We'll get to come back and play, younger guys. Yeah. And somehow the year they ran all over us. when I was a ninth grader, they quit doing that. So we missed our option to do it. So the Ashland High School did not play Coles or Putnam or a combination of them while I was in high school. So they must have started that afterwards.
So you all played at Putnam, though, right, in junior high? I mean,
yes. So in other words, we practiced on what we used to in the spring and the early fall in August. We practiced on the parking lot, which was hilly, as you may recall, in those days, and it would have 4-foot high weeds. So the first few days, the drill was just to run around in circles and trample down the weeds and get in shape. But the great thing was, we dressed in the stadium and played our games in the stadium.
Can you remember your first time, actually as a player? I mean, obviously you'd been there as a fan, as a young boy, and probably had run around the end zones like we all did back then. Can you remember your first time as a player walking into Putnam Stadium, walking into that locker room?
I can.
I know it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while, but it was, to some extent we had an advantage because we dressed in that locker room so that, we'd been in the locker room before. But I remember walking out onto the field with, Putnam had these kind of stripes on the shoulders and with uniform, my first game in a uniform, to play a game. And, it was exciting. You were a little nervous. I was a lineman. Somebody asked me once, how'd you end up being a lineman? And I tell them, well, when I went out in the spring of the 7th grade, they lined people up, quarterbacks, halfbacks, and when they got down to guards, there were just 3 guys. And I thought, well, that's my position. So there was less competition. So I became a lineman from the start. So you have less butterflies. If you're a quarterback, you worry about you're going to fumble the ball, you're going to throw it to the wrong guy. As a lineman, all you worry about is can I play tougher than the guy who's going to be in front of me. And I think we were playing the Ironton B team, which was a bunch of big guys.
Wow. Yeah.
The year before, Putnam had been very successful because we had Buddy Sexton and some of the guys who became really good players and stars at the high school. We were a little more challenged my year, and so we didn't beat the Ironton B team, and I've forgotten the other B teams we played. But I remember it was just a great experience, and we were excited, and I just wouldn't have missed it.
Mm-hmm. So you went on and played. You played all 3 years? I guess you were on the B team in *54. Your sophomore year.
Yeah, I played on the B team. There were in those days, although my year there were 3 or 4 or maybe 5 guys who played on at least a game in the varsity, so you got listed on the roster. Right. Although they didn't letter. Bob Wright was a great player, probably the best player in my class, and he played pretty regularly as a sophomore. But if you look at the rosters for my junior and senior year, there are virtually no sophomores on the roster. And, we'll talk a little. Herbie came up as a sophomore in the early part of my senior season and joined us and did a great job. Yeah. But the tradition was that sophomores played pretty much on the sophomore team and then moved up as juniors to the varsity. So I played my whole sophomore year on the B team of what was then known as the sophomore team.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say that was kind of just how it was. You had to be pretty special to play as a sophomore, and really very few played as sophomores. And as you said, you look at that roster. There's 4 or 5 listed on the roster, which means they probably got in maybe a game or a quarter or whatever. They probably didn't even letter. But your sophomore season, you guys, the Tomcats went 4-5-1, and that was with Denver Ball as the head coach, and Denver was the coach your junior year as well, and that would be his last season as head coach. It's interesting. Your old team. I'm looking at the roster. Your junior year, you had one guy over 200 pounds. And, that's just fascinating to me, because I guess people were just smaller then, than they are now.
It was a combination. Even at the time, my mother was a great collector of newspaper articles. So I had a whole box of them I inherited, included Rusty McGill stories. And Denver noted that the 55 team, my junior year, was the lightest team in Ashland history. Now, to some extent, it was light because Gilly Lehman and Buddy Sexton were, 130 pounders, and so that lowered the rate. But my sophomore year, that 4, 5, and 1 year, had several big guys. Jim Sparks, John Zakem, Larry Hiley were guys, 200, 220, 230. But yeah, once you got to my junior and senior year, I think my senior year we didn't have anybody at 200. I think Cliff Lyons and Ed Sexton were close. But it's a combination of, it's a long time ago. People eat better, get vitamins. As a general matter, people are bigger now. And in those days, virtually nobody lifted weights. And Gilly Lehman did it secretly because he was so small. I think he was 117 in junior high school. And part of his toughness was that he had lifted weights between his sophomore and senior year. So by his senior year, I think he was up to 130 pounds or 132, but lightning quick. And he was tough. But so people didn't lift weights. So if you weighed 170, you were 180, you were naturally a reasonably good-sized guy. And in fact, when I played, and you played guys, the guys you didn't want to play with 190 pounders. The 230 pounders were just sort of overweight guys. They were not 6'5" muscled guys who ran, 400 or 500. So it was a different era to that extent. But even in that different era, my junior and senior year, we were small. We got outweighed in my senior year. We were being outweighed in some games by 25 pounds a person.
You guys had a really balanced attack, though. Ralph Clear and Gilly Lehman and Bob Wright all had over 500 yards rushing that year, and then Buddy Sexton had nearly 300, and John Dixon had a couple hundred. So, heavy run offense, which back then, of course, it was, for pretty much everybody. And you were a center, so you moved from guard to center at some point. Like you said, I guess you followed Larry Hiley, who I think he was a center, wasn't he?
Well, he ultimately was a tackle. He had a shoulder problem, so his senior year he didn't get to play much. Denver was a fascinating guy. He decided this was going to really be a first-class program. So we went to summer camp before my sophomore year, which is how I got to know Hiley and some of these other guys well, for a week and played Prestonsburg in a scrimmage. And he provided athletic equipment to everybody, so you didn't provide your own T-shirts and equipment. And then my junior year, he decided we'd run the single wing as well as the T formation. So as everybody else was moving away from the single wing, we ran them both. So what happened was my junior year, we went to Lafayette to play the first game. And in those days, we took the train to Lexington the afternoon, and then you played that evening, so you didn't really have much time to rest. And I didn't play much, if at all, in that game, and we lost, 12-7 or something. And that next day, Denver being, I guess that might have been a Friday night game. It seemed to be the next day, either Saturday or Sunday. We went down to Prestonsburg to do a scrimmage, and he took the guys who hadn't played as much against Lafayette. And somehow in all of that, they decided that they wanted to move the line around a little. And the next thing I knew, I was, for the next game, the starting center. So I had to quickly learn how to be a center. And so I was the center for the next couple of years.
So and you all played Catholicsburg that next week and got the first win, got your first win, I guess, as a starting center, Big Ten 34-0. Interesting assistant coaches on Denver's staff that year were Bob Coburn, Bob Lavoie, who was also a basketball coach, big, tall guy, Rex Miller, of course, and Bob Sang, who, was a terrific coach. I mean, he knew as much as any of those five, I'm sure, to be honest. And I know, I knew Bob from, I'm good friends with his son, Rick. So, we were in the same neighborhood. So I knew Bob as a neighborhood guy too, I guess, but a great person and excellent coach. And,
he was a great guy. He was the line coach, and he arranged for his homeroom to have Roger, me, and a few other of the football players. So for 3 years I was in Coach Sang's homeroom. And then my dad died, unfortunately, just in August before my senior year, and so Coach Sang kind of became a substitute or an alternate father for me. And we kept in touch. Every time I came back to Ashland, he and I and Marlene would go down to the Bluegrass and have flying saucers and just keep up with each other. And so I followed his career as he went to Gallipolis and then to Huntington. And, of course, he had a great career as a head coach in Huntington, but he really was a knowledgeable guy and just a great human being.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he coached for 50 years. I mean, can you imagine that? That's unheard of. You know, the coach last 5 years now, he's doing good. So to me, that's just incredible that he was able to be a coach for 50 years. So, but anyway, your junior year, it was really a pretty successful year because I know then that I'm looking at this schedule, man. There's no gimmies in that. That's for sure. I mean, you got like Stonewall Jackson and Ironton and Point Pleasant and Fort Thomas Highlands. I'll tell you something interesting about the Highlands game. You all tied them 2020. Ashland has not beaten them since 1954. That was the last time the Tomcats beat Fort Thomas Highlands. So it's been a while.
Yeah, no, that was the year I remember reading through the news articles. Manual outweighed us by 20 pounds a man, and male outweighed us by 25. And in those days, you know, it's different now. Ashland, in those days, they didn't have classifications. You just played whoever you played. So we always played Louisville schools, played Highlands. Sometimes we played Paducah Tillman, although we didn't my 2 years. But, you know, we signed up Danville for my senior year, and so you just had to, you know, we went to, in fact, Denver at one point was saying we should play Massillon. And I remembered my years in Cleveland and thought, I don't know if playing Massillon is such a good idea. Playing Portsmouth and Ironton is good enough. But you had to go a long way. I mean, we moved to Washington, and people here would talk about away games of 15 or 20 miles. You know, that's a long way. And I said, you don't know an away game until you go 200 miles by bus. That's an away game. When you go to Louisville.
Or like you said, or take the train. I mean, my goodness. But anyway, your all season, like I said, you beat Calixburg 34-0. Then you beat Stonewall Jackson, that's always a great win when you can beat them. And we hadn't beaten them in something like 10 years. It's one of my favorite memories. Goes back to how big guys are. You know, Stonewall had I think won 8 or 9 in a row against Ashland and was a good team. So they show up at Putnam Stadium, and they have some big guy weighs about 230, and so he's playing right over center. And the first offensive play, he comes in, and I end up about 5 or 7 yards back in the backfield. And I thought, well, this is going to be a long night. And I never could quite figure out what happened. Either he ran out of gas because he was out of shape, or, you know, I was a reasonably good blocker, but I don't think I was intimidating that way. By the end of the first quarter, I'm moving him to the right, I'm moving him to the left, and it looked apparently awesome in the stands because there's this humongous guy. And I was a pretty good size guy. You know, I was 6 feet tall and weighed 175, but he was a lot bigger. And, you know, we'd run to the left, we'd run to the right. And it was, afterwards I remember thinking, well, you know, it pays to play the guys who weigh 240 if they're not weightlifters and not the guys who weigh 190. Yeah, they're a lot slower, so you're getting the jump on them, and you're getting leverage on them and everything else. Yeah, so that's interesting. But yeah, it's interesting too, like you said, that the bigger guys, the few that there were, they weren't really the dominating guys. They were just kind of big, heavy guys, basically. So
now you took a guy like Larry Hiley. Larry was about 200, but Larry was quick, and he was tough. And it was too bad he had a shoulder problem. I remember at summer camp. Before his senior year there, he'd had a shoulder problem, and he separated it again at the camp, and so they tried to put braces on it. But you know, he was probably the best lineman in the time I was in Ashland.
John, how big a deal was it to be a Tomcat during that time? I mean, at school?
It was a big deal. You know, it was Friday Night Lights. You know, there was no, in those days, no nearby professional teams. Marshall was by and everybody rooted for Kentucky. But, you know, in terms of things going on, Friday night, that was the only game in town. And people paid a lot of attention and, you know, were concerned or delighted depending on the outcome. And it applied to basketball as well. I mean, high school sports in Ashland were a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and still are, which is, you know, remarkable considering, you know, the way the world is and the way things are. But, you know, it's still, you know, that small community. And I think, like you said, it's the Friday night thing to do. You go to the Putnam Stadium, you know, and watch the Tomcats. You guys lost to Portsmouth 21-6 at Portsmouth, and at that point you're 2-2. So you know, I know how Ashland fans are. You know, they're with you win or tie, and let's not lose a game, or you know, it's not good. So you guys get on a little bit of a roll there from that point, and actually won 3 in a row against some pretty good people. Huntington East, Ironton, and Pleasant. You know, those are all great wins.
Yeah, no, they were good wins. And one of the things that nobody paid a lot of attention to, though it kept showing up, is Mike Fugman, classmate of mine, was an amazing guy for being alert and quick. He was really lightning quick, although he only weighed about 55 pounds. And so in the Stonewall Jackson game, he covered a kickoff. And then at East, he went 68 yards with a fumble recovery. And then at Point Pleasant, we won the game because he blocked a punt and fell on it in the end zone near the end of the game. And he had partially blocked a punt earlier. And then, you know, we play Highlands. And, again, he covers a short kickoff. In fact, I'll go through it all because I went back and made notes about it, because one of the critical things that happened between my junior and senior year is Mike was scheduled to be the co-captain. He had ended up, you know, scoring two touchdowns as a lineman, and he kept doing it. I mean, against Newport, you know, he had a fumble recovery to protect us our win, and then you know, against Manual, even though he lost, he recovered a fumble, and then recovered an onside kick. He blocked an extra point. He was just a uniquely quick and good guy, and had a kind of nervous breakdown in the spring, after spring of 56, and so he didn't play. And we were shorthanded in 56 anyway, but it wasn't as if, you know, well, he was just another guy. He was clearly for a lineman, a game changer. He was just all over the field, and he had a great junior year, and I think would have been spectacular. I was delighted that he was elected the co-captain, and I just kind of filled in afterwards. But I filled in as the position as co-captain. Nobody could fill in for all the things that he was able to accomplish on a football field.
That's interesting. I've heard the name, but I didn't realize all that. That's really interesting. Yeah. It's amazing, you know, what a player like that can do for you too. And like you said, not having him in that senior year, that had to be rough, really.
Yeah. No, I mean, we won a couple games that year, junior year, of that 6-4-1. A couple of those games were because of Mike.
Mm-hmm. Now the Point Pleasant was 7-6, so that was the only touchdown of the game. So
right.
And Newport you won by a touchdown, so you needed that touchdown. So yeah, your last two games, as we mentioned earlier, played Manual and Male, and they were both they were just bigger, better, whatever, and those were pretty bad, really, 32-13 and 42-12. But like I said, when I look back at Ashland's schedules, you know, it's like you said too, that not everybody wanted to play Ashland because they did have a good reputation. So you were pretty good if you were going to play Ashland, you know. So there was never there's not a gimme game in that whole season, really. When I look at that, at your all's 11-game season, there's no game you go, oh, we're going to win that game for sure. You know,
and it got worse the next year, my senior year, because everybody else decided to have a really good year, and so we ended up playing teams that when we'd play them had lost one game. I think when we played Highlands, they had won. They were 5-1, and they'd beaten had scored a touchdown. So they had 5 shutouts. And as I went back and reviewed it, at the time, you know, you just played one game at a time, and who knew you knew they were going to be good. But only in retrospect did I discover that it was just one of those years where everybody else really decided it was a good time to be good.
Yeah. And like you said, really, it's hard to know, you know, how good that team maybe was. You know, you finished 2-8, which is, you know, that's a disappointing record or whatever. But when you look at who you all played, my goodness, and really, not too many lopsided games. Male won 27-0 in the last game of the year, and Portsmouth beat you 27-0. Portsmouth was pretty good though. They were always challenging to be one.
Well,
that
was one of that was one of their better teams. In fact, Huntington East we lost 14-0 to. They were 4-0 coming into the game, and the consensus beforehand was they weren't quite as good as Portsmouth. And so I thought, whoa, okay. But it just goes back to, it was one of those years where they all looked like that was a good year for them to have a great year. And so, we started off well against Catlettsburg and ran the ball. Our problem, to some extent, was, if you go back and look, people say, well, we were bigger in 56 than we were in 55, but that was only because Buddy Sexton and Gilly Lehman had graduated. And so we had bigger backs, but they weren't that much bigger. And the linemen were pretty much all the same size. So we were, outweighed in a lot of games. But I think our biggest change, as I say, losing Mike, I just can't overestimate, because you say he just was a spark plug and just energetic, enthusiastic. And then we lost a lot of good guys off that 55 team. Ralph Clear was a wonderful runner, defensive player. Gilly and Buddy Sexton were lightning quick. That's the only way they survived at the weight they were playing. And so, you had a turnover. In fact, I had at the time, who knows when you're a kid. I remember at the start of my senior season, Miguel wrote a note that, this is going to be a very inexperienced team. And I remember at the time thinking, a lot of us played a lot, but a lot of us were 7 or 8. We had 9 lettermen on the team, and so it really was an inexperienced team, besides being a little smaller. And I think one of the things we lost with Ralph, Buddy, and Gilly was they were track stars, and they were fast, and so it gave us speed that we didn't have, couldn't equal my senior year. We had Robert Wright, who had a great high school career and was a great player, and even with all the difficulties, gained a lot of yards running, and was just a wonderful defensive player. And so, as I say, clearly the best player on the team.
Yeah, he had 772 yards rushing that year. By far your leader. And opening game there, he rushed for 214 against Catlettsburg. So that's a pretty good start to that season. You all did win the opener 20-7, and but then proceeded to lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a row. And I know
6 in a row.
I know how tough it is in Ashland when the Tomcats are losing 6 in a row. And this is Rex's first. This is his first season. Did Denver just kind of step aside, or do you remember what happened there?
It's always been a question in my mind. As I say, Denver was a great guy and creative. As I say, nobody else was running. We would line up in a T, and then if we were going to run the single wing, we just shifted the line one player over. So I was the center in the T formation, and Mike was the left guard, and as we'd shift to the right, Mike became the center for the single wing. And half the time teams would go offside as we'd move to the right. Only Denver would have thought, hey, let's run the single wing as well as the T formation. And he had announced before the season started in 55 that if the team if he couldn't win 7 games with that team, he was going to retire. So obviously we won 6 games and tied 1 that game against Highland. So although McGill wrote a column saying before we played the last 2 games, and which was pretty clear we were probably going to lose, that he thought Denver had already made up his mind no matter what the games were. And I never could quite figure out, I got to know Denver a little, but the next thing I knew, he was coaching at Raceland.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't figure out years later whether he could see that everybody, Dick Vaughn, who was a great lineman on the 55 team, graduated, and Don McPeak, who also was a good lineman. So we lost a lot of really, really good players off that. What was Jones's? Walter Jones. It was a honorable mention All-State end. So I don't know whether Denver looked down the pike and thought, the next couple of years maybe aren't going to be so good. Maybe this is a good time not to be the coach. And I originally thought at the time that, he just decided he'd head up with coaching. He was going to go into administration or something, and then was a little surprised to find he was coaching at Raceland. Then I think he may have coached at Fairfield for a while.
Yeah.
I I never heard a story as to. I guess the only background noise a little was because he did have this flair for, well, we'll buy everybody socks and shirts and stuff, so they had to bring their own. That I think he may have spent more money than the athletic department and the school was used to. And going to the summer camp for a week with I don't know how many guys he took, 60, 80 people was not inexpensive. And so I remember at the time hearing there was some grumbling that maybe Denver was spending more money than the school wanted, the athletic department and the school wanted to spend.
And if you're going to spend money, you better win big. That's kind of the way it's always been there. It seems like. So,
well, I think that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could spend, if you were 8-2 or 9-1, you could spend whatever you wanted. And as I said, I think. Now looking back at who left after my junior year, which was going to be clear, and while you had a good sophomore group coming along, who obviously then had a great season in '58, but in those days, as I say, in fact, Herbie was about the only sophomore who played regularly. You looked at it and thought, well, this is going to be a tough year or two, and so he might have just decided, well, I'm going to get fired if we can't do better.
Yeah,
but it was too bad because he was fun to play for.
Yeah, and he was a good coach. And like I say, an innovator. Who would have thought single wing and T formation and alternate them? And my goodness, he was a really good coach. He really was.
Yeah.
I know Rex. Of course, that was Rex's first season. As head coach, and his first two seasons weren't great. That year you guys were 2-8. The next year he's 4-6. But things really took off after that for him. So I've seen it through the years where programs go in cycles. It's tough to be good every year. I mean, it really is. And as you said, this year Herb he's the only sophomore on the roster. So he may have I know Fillmore's not on the roster, but he played because he carried 3 times. So there's probably a few others that.
Well, by the last game, we ended up with at home. Seems to me it was probably the Danville game that they started to play, and then we went down to Mail. I think a couple of those kids played, but basically, as I say, it was just not the tradition then. In some ways, Herbie was so good that he obviously made a difference. But, you could argue might have made more sense to bring a couple of those kids up earlier.
Yeah, especially, or maybe play him a lot more, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. Of course, Herb rushed for 40 yards in your all's last game against Mail, and he ended up with 113 yards rushing that year and threw a pass and, and he told, I don't know if you've listened to the one with him and Dick Fillmore yet. It's really good. You'll have to listen to it if you haven't. It's one before this one. He talked about putting the socks on. Y'all had the socks that you had to actually tape down. You had the long socks, and then the knee pad went over those. Well, nobody told him that he had to tape the socks down. So he put the socks on. They gave him the socks, and he put the socks on, and he went out. And, of course, they're drooping down. He's about ready to trip over them, and he can't understand what's going on because nobody else was just doing that. And I can't remember who he said. I don't think it was you, but anyway.
I think
somebody,
it was me. No, I think he maintains I was the one that, as a senior, took pity on a sophomore and told him how to put the socks on.
Okay,
I think that's right.
Yeah.
So it was a funny season. We went to Huntington East. Johnny Fry was a great back who actually became a basketball player at Duke, so I got to know him there. But they're 4-0 when we go play them. And we lose 14-0 on 2 long runs. Otherwise, we play them dead even. And we go to Ironton, and they get ahead 19-0, and we close to get to 19-14 and have a good shot toward the end. And we just, we couldn't close the deal on a lot of these times. Again, even Point Pleasant, the score looks terrible, 32-18. But at one point it's 19-12. In the second half, and then it's 26-12, and then it's 26-19, and then they get a big run, or 26-18. So we never felt, until you really got to even the Highlands game, we never felt that we were, out of it, getting wiped out. Highlands was 5-1 and 4 shutouts, as I say, or 5 shutouts maybe. We were the first team they beat that got a touchdown.
Wow.
And that was where we got to the longest losing streak in history. But, it turned out, if you looked at it, we got more yards rushing and more yards passing, and we're even on first downs in that game, but you'd never know it by the score. So I remember playing that game. I remember Dick Callahan coming in toward the end being the quarterback, and I remember giving him an idea for a play that turned out to be the touchdown play near the end of the game. But again, we felt we're holding our own. We just somehow fumbled a lot, had trouble making ends meet. But then we have to talk about Lafayette.
Oh yeah, I was going to say we have a big moment still though, and it's interesting. In the book, you're in there. Almost anybody that scored a touchdown is in there, and there it is, John Koskinen, interception, touchdown. There we go. So tell me about that game a little bit.
Well, it's a muddy night. We played actually in the 55 game when we played Ironton. The 14-12 game, it's muddy. And Denver was smart enough. We practiced on a muddy field all week. And we didn't do that for Lafayette, but it was a muddy night, and the game report shows there were 11 punts and 10 fumbles. It was just that messy a night there. So, we're 1-6. People are sort of grumbling. I guess it was known that it was the longest losing streak in history, and so obviously it's a good time to win a game. And so Herbie now is playing for us and with us, and is doing a good job. And so he scores a touchdown early on, and then in the fourth quarter, actually a quarterback at Putnam named Danny Shepard had been the quarterback for Putnam, and then Joe had been the backup, and then Joe Hearn became the quarterback. And Danny moved after our junior year, moved to Lexington and played quarterback for Lafayette. And I always thought that Danny was the one who threw the screen pass that I intercepted, but I think it turned out to be another quarterback. In any event, somewhere in the middle of the fourth quarter or so, we're up. I think we're up 7-0, either 6 or 7. Extra points were hard to come by, and it was a screen pass. But what happened was the guy who was blocking me must not have remembered it was a screen pass because he's supposed to let me go. And so he blocks, and by the time I get off the block to charge the passer, I'm right in the middle of the screen. So the quarterback throws the ball. And I played a lot of sandlot football, so, I used to, play quarterback and end, and, you throw balls, you play 3 aside. Everybody catches the ball. So I nonchalantly caught the ball, and it was close enough. I think it was 15 or 20 yards away, and there was one guy, I think was the guy who was supposed to get the pass there, and I just took a step to the right, and Ed Sexton blocked him, and I scored a touchdown, and it's just great. So the headlines were Conley and Koskinen scored touchdowns, and so Herbie and I went down in history together there. It was it was a great night. It was just an important game for us. Lafayette was one of the teams that was not having a great year itself. In retrospect, I thought, well, if everybody was having a kind of mediocre year, we would have done a whole lot better. But it was, if you're a lineman and you ever score a touchdown, that's great. That's why we kidded Mike Fugman having scored 2 touchdowns. He was one of the leading scorers in the 55 team. He used to take a lot of friendly kidding about being Mr. Touchdown because, if you're a lineman, you just don't score touchdowns very often.
Yeah, and we have the picture of you at that game. Your second hand, is it with your uncle or somebody?
No, it's a nice guy. It's a nice guy named Jack Stone, who was an executive at Ashland Oil, and his family and our family were very close friends. He was a great friend of my dad's.
Okay.
And I think that might have been Father's Night. And so Jack was standing in for my dad.
Wow.
And so it was a logical guy for me to shake hands with after the game.
Yeah. What a great picture they got. I can't believe somebody was still around at that time at the end of the game to do that, but that's great.
Yeah, no, it is a great picture, and you have to realize it was a muddy field. In fact, Ronnie Perry, I think, is in that picture, covered with mud. So I don't know how, I never quite figured out who was standing out in the field to take that picture.
Yeah, but obviously it was right there. So, and I know that at the newspaper I used that picture probably 5 or 6 times at least. It just told some history or something. I don't know. I really liked it, and just like the emotions of it, and good. It was a good picture. As you say, you guys are playing now. You're playing Danville. Danville was really good. Still is. They got a great football tradition, and they beat you all 25-12. Like you say, another really pretty competitive game. I mean, Callahan passed for 138 yards. I'll tell you something about Herb too. That was his only touchdown. That was his first Tomcat touchdown. His only touchdown that sophomore year. So that's pretty cool to have that in common with Herb that one night for sure.
Yeah, and in fact, Danville, when I looked up, was 4-2, and coming into the game, the 2 games they had lost to were the number 4 and number 8 teams in the state, and the year before they'd been 9-1 and had most of the guys back. So It was, a pretty interesting group to play. And again, they had a kid who was an all-state back. He was a great runner. And so they were tough. They were big, and they were tough to stop.
Yeah. You didn't play any other sports, right? At Ashland.
I played tennis of all things. My senior, I had fiddled around with tennis for a while, but and there were a couple, Jim Rutledge and George Rupert. Rutledge was a track runner, and Rupert had played football until his knees hurt. He was a big guy, 6'5" or so. They were great tennis players. George went and played at Kentucky for 4 years, and Jim Rutledge, who was a 440-yard dash guy, played at Marshall. So that, and they were a year ahead of me. And anyway, so the Ashland tennis team was really terrific my junior year. So my senior year, when I show up to play, we're not quite as good, but it was one of those things. Everybody said, "Oh, here comes Ashland," and then they discovered we were kind of more average as we played. But I still play tennis. It's a great thing to play. You can't play football when you get to be older.
Exactly.
But you can play tennis.
You can, or pickleball, which is almost like tennis. So
Exactly.
That's real big in Ashland now, by the way, pickleball for some reason.
Oh, good.
But, yeah, it really is. It's people are picking it up, and I know George very well, and his family, they were good athletes, and I think George wasn't George a kicker, maybe?
George was a kicker. In fact, he is trying to remember if on that 54's team, either 53 or 54, his knees were bad, but he played on the 54 team. And what does it say? Let's see, Rupert. I'm checking the Mark Maynard. George Rupert weighed 230 pounds. They don't tell you how tall he was. He was not overweight. He was about 6'4".
Oh, he's a big guy, yeah.
Yeah, he had played at Coles, and then he just had bad knees, so he punted. And he punted for the 54 team, and there was a game midway through the year. He punted, and whoever we were playing in the stadium, I was there, looked like the guy was going to make it for a touchdown, and George, bad knee and all, got him at the sideline. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's pretty fast for a guy with a bad knee. But he was a great punter.
Yeah. He claims to have one of the longest punts they've ever had. I forget what he said it was, and I don't really. I'm not going back and checking everybody's punts to find out if that's true.
No, he was, but he really was a uniquely good punter. Just because he was tall, so he had long legs, so he got a great swing into it, and he was strong. But as I say, he was a better tennis player than even as a punter footballer. I played on the team at Kentucky, and the SEC was tough. He was good. He really was a great tennis player.
Of course, I know you went on to Duke, and you went on to great things. John, looking back on your Ashland life, though, what has made you want to come back and to, you've done things in the community to help the community. What has been that draw for you to do that?
Well, it was just I thought a remarkable place to grow up. I loved my years in Ashland. Obviously, I loved playing sports, and just had great friends. I still have. And as I may remember, a few years ago, the only graduation speech I've ever given, I gave in the stadium at Ashland. Once I was IRS commissioner, people thought, hey, that'd be neat. And I tried to get the kids to understand I left Ashland to go to Duke, and I literally didn't know anybody outside of Ashland. And the point I was trying to make was, it's a great place to grow up, and it's a great springboard to go on somewhere. And you don't have to have connections. You don't have to know a lot of people. If you just go out and work hard and do your best, you can accomplish a lot of interesting things coming, from a relatively small town like Ashland. And so I just feel it was my springboard to going forward. And I've always felt you need to, you can play it forward, but you also need to play it back. And so I've come back to, I think I missed the first reunion because I was at law school. And in fact, maybe I was in England, I guess that's where I was, studying international law. But since then, I've been to every Ashland reunion and a number of other occasions just because, I love the people. Half my class didn't go to college. They were, in those days you could work at Armco or Ashland Oil, Semisalve, and you could make a good career and retire very comfortably on a comfortable pension. And it was just, the other thing about it I always found was you got to know everybody, because everybody went to Ashland High School. You were, if your father worked at Ashland Oil, or your father worked in a rolling mill, or was, you could be on from the quote other side of the tracks, and we all just went to school together. And so you just got to know and like people for being people. And I always felt it gave me an understanding and a comfort level with everybody that I've met. And whether, I've never looked down on people who weren't quite as successful or had difficulties, because, I grew up with a lot of people who came from backgrounds that weren't overly successful. And it was just, from my mind, in fact, my kids, when they were growing up in Washington, we purposely live in an integrated neighborhood, but, I used to kid we're the blackest people on the block because these were doctors and lawyers and well-established. And I always thought my concern for my kids was they didn't get to know people across the economic spectrum. People coming from lower income backgrounds, struggling, where money every week and every month is a challenge. And I just felt that coming out of Ashland, I just got to know people as people. They were wonderful, and it was a great experience. And I've always just loved going back.
Mm-hmm. Well, I tell you, I just from dealing with people that have grown up in Ashland, and so many of them are much like you, that they don't forget where they're from, and I think that's just so important and so really neat. I know, part of your old thing, Madge Haney does such a good job with your class reunions. I mean, she does better than anybody could ever do, I think. I mean, she's the example of how you set up class reunions to keep it going, for as long as possible. And she's done a great job with that, for sure. And kudos to her for that.
Yeah, now we all keep encouraging and nudging her to keep it up, because she's just done, and with support of a number of classmates in the area. But she's in the last 20 years been the driver. And the rest of us are beneficiaries of it. And so, I look back, and Roger Brown is still around, and Ronnie Perry, Joe Hearn. I haven't seen Joe for probably a few reunions, but I was there a couple of years ago and saw. I convinced everybody we ought to have a reunion for our 80th birthday, because our next one isn't for another couple of years yet. And so, it's been just great to keep up with them, guys I played with.
Yeah. You never forget your teammates, and and I'm sure you'll never forget that touchdown. You'll never forget playing in Putnam Stadium, and I was thinking about too Putnam Stadium. When you played there, it was 20 years old. That's it. It was 20 years old. And so that's still a fairly new stadium at that point.
When you're a kid, you never really pay much attention. 20 years old sounds like it's really old. In retrospect, only when we were doing the fundraising for the stadium renovations did I realize it was about 20 years old when I played in it, and I thought, it was really relatively new, although the dressing rooms were always crummy, even when it was new.
You'd be proud of those dressing rooms now. Even the visitor side has very nice dressing room, and home side as well, and it's a beautiful place. They do a great job of with the grounds crew. I know you came there on the day the whole place got flooded for what was supposed to be the opening night, but it it's really held up since then. They've, done some work to fix that, of course, but it's still there's something about that place, that is a little, there's a mystique or something about it. And I know even opponents, didn't mind coming in and playing. They wanted to play there. And that's the kind of place it is. And you won't find too many high schools that are like that.
No, in fact, then especially, and even now, but then it was really one of the few enclosed stadiums. It was a real stadium as opposed to just bleachers on both sides of the field. And,
right.
It was unique, and certainly in eastern Kentucky. It has a wonderful history. And as you say, opponents like to come because it was impressive to play in a real stadium.
Yeah. And of course, Ashland had their way with them most of the time, through the years. But, I know Ashland worked up a series with Raceland, and Ashland had never been to Raceland. This was the first year they played at Raceland for the first time in history this year, because Raceland always enjoyed coming to Putnam Stadium and playing, like you say, playing in a stadium. Most places are a field with bleachers on them. There's not too many stadiums, so very unique and a great place. But anyway, you've been very kind with your time. I certainly appreciate it, and I know people we'll look forward to hearing from you about these seasons. And just we're real proud of you, John, for all you've done throughout your life. It's just an impressive list of things. It just is, and I'm truly glad to be able to call you a friend.
Well, it's my pleasure both being here. You are a great friend. You yourself have made wonderful contributions over the years, and this podcast is terrific. It's been the ones I've been able to listen to. I give you a great window on, high school football generally, and Ashland football, and Ashland in particular. So Good luck with it as you go forward. I'm looking forward to the next versions.
Okay. And that's for now. We're going to sign off. Thank you, John Koskinen, and we will catch you next time on Tomcat Tales podcast.